I've had some really, really nice looking people, like people that looked like they're upstanding. They had like porn issues, like they were dealing in like trafficking and stuff. It's like really dirty stuff. It's like you would never know.
If you do credit, if you do look for income, if you do look for clean criminal, clean eviction records, that gets you pretty far through it right there. Statistically speaking, that alone gets you pretty far.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Eat, Sleep, and Invest. I'm your host, Brian Driscoll, and I'm here with Aaron Bubenheim. What's up, man?
Hey, man. How are you?
What's going on? How you doing?
I'm doing great. Really happy to be here and glad to chat with you a little bit about investment property.
Everyone listen. So Aaron has a lot of experience in the real estate space, property management. So Aaron, give everybody a little background on like how you got into real estate and what your experience is like.
Yeah, prior to like 2013, I was a mortgage loan officer. I was getting a little bit of experience in the in real estate on that side of things, and then I knew I needed to get out of that. I hated sitting at a desk and just kind of doing mortgage loan stuff. It was not my thing. So I was looking for work, and I ended up stumbling on property management job at Arbors Management, one of the big Pittsburgh corporate property management companies. They had a job opening as a property manager. I probably didn't even know what a property manager was at that time. I owned one rental property of my own at that time. And so I realized, okay, it's basically just being a property manager, except for other people's property, not your own. So I thought I could do that. Got my license, got the job, worked over there for about a year and a half, and realized a couple of things. One, I absolutely love the job. I love that it's problem solving. It's always something different, something interesting every single day. You're out on the road, you're visiting properties, you got stuff to do, you got to react quick. And I love that. So did that for a year and a half, ended up forming a property management company with some partners in Pittsburgh after that, owned a third of that company for the last about 9 years up until this past year. So went through a lot. That company grew. We had over 2,000 properties under management, all scattered site, all third party, managing other people's stuff. And just learned a lot during that time, gained incredible experience in those years. But this year last year, at the end of that year, I sold my shares of that company and decided to form my own solo company with my wife, Pam, and a couple of our friends, Josh and Dawn, and some other people. And so now we're just kind of embarking out again, sort of starting from scratch. So a lot of exciting stuff, a lot of stuff I never would have expected to see, tons of lessons learned, but excited to get started out.
So first thing I'll say, psycho, saying you enjoy property management. Like that's the one part of the business that I do not like. You gotta be like a special type of person there.
It's a certain type of masochism, I think, to enjoy it. And believe me, there are times where I think, man, I got to get out of this business. This is so horrible, such a horrible business. I want to do something different that's not so insane, but I've been doing it for so long that, comparatively, I'm better at it than most people. And you got to do the thing that you're comparatively better than other people at, I think. And that's me in property management. So, but it's extremely stressful. Everyone's always mad at you. The property owners are mad at you. The contractors are mad at you. The tenants are mad at you. And somehow you have to balance those three individual groups out at all times. And you're never going to make all three of them happy. You just have to create the best outcome you can with what you're given.
So this is going to be an interesting conversation because there's different types of investors. Mm-hmm. So I was just meeting with a guy this morning. We weren't meeting on real estate or anything, but he was talking to me and he's trying to build a real estate portfolio. He has like 3 properties that he's doing himself.
Yep.
So we have that type of investor.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have an investor like me. I got like, I don't know, 15 or 18 properties, like nothing huge.
Yep.
And then you got investors that are like in the business. They got like 100, 200, 300 doors.
That's right. Or more.
Yeah, or more. So let's talk about I was the beginner guy first once.
Yep.
I don't know if you remember when I met you. My problem is I rent to the wrong people.
That's right. Yeah, and you quickly learn from that. And you and I have always been aligned in that idea that the rest of the property management project that you're undertaking is everything follows from how you screen your tenants. So if you're placing tenants that are underscreened, if you're placing people that are going to not pay their rent, not take care of the property, they're going to, lose their job. They're going to go through all this stuff in their lives, and it's going to result in damage to your property or non-payment of rent. Nothing else works. And so you got to start there. So that was one thing you and I have always been very aligned on.
Yeah. And same thing. You actually have, like, if you're a property management company also, you have to do the same thing with your clients too, don't you?
That's right. Yeah. You can't just sign up anybody. It became something that I got really good at was, getting a phone call from somebody. Hey, I got some property. I'd like to see if you guys would manage it. First thing I would do is go see the property, any vacant unit, whatever. And I would look for all the worst aspects I could find about the property. Look for every problem I could look for. Take pictures of it, take videos of it, send it right over to the owner. And I would confront them right away on all the worst aspects of it, because the way that they react to that message is how I knew whether I could work with them or not. If they reacted to that saying, oh, wow, my current property manager never told me this, and I would like to handle it immediately, then I could work with them. Or if they said, yeah, I know about that, I've been putting that off, and you know what, that's just going to have to be handled next year. Can you give me a tenant now? I knew that wasn't going to work, because you could just tell they did not want to take that problem seriously. They didn't understand the detriment of putting those problems off.
Yeah, because it becomes your problem then, because you get the tenant that complains about it, and you go to the owner because you can't give the okay to fix it.
Like the property manager is like a person who's being asked to use somebody else's tool to accomplish a task. Like if somebody handed you a shovel to dig a hole, but the handle was broken and it was rusty and it was bent, you have to immediately say, this thing isn't going to work unless you fix it. And everything else comes from that. And I didn't have a problem, like I said, with some owner that did have properties that had problems. But if the owner has the attitude of let's go ahead and address it now, then I knew we could work together. But if they just wanted to pretend like it wasn't there and they just wanted to make it my problem, it would put me into a position where I was going to fail, and it would put them in a position where I was going to help them fail, and that's just never going to work.
Right, that makes sense. Okay, so let's talk about the new investor, right? Mm-hmm. Guy's got 1, 2, 3 properties, things like that.
Yep.
I know most new investors in their head, they're like, I can't even use a property manager. I need to do it all myself because I don't have enough properties. What do you see about those guys? Like, is there a certain amount of properties you need to make sense to use a property manager? And what do you tell those people?
I think question number one is, do you have the personality and the bandwidth in your life to do it? So if you have that if you're a people person, if you can handle, the phone calls from the tenants that are upset and all that kind of thing, at first you probably should save that money, because you think about it, you got to pay a leasing fee. Usually that's around 1 month's rent. Then you're going to pay management every month, usually, somewhere between 8 and 12%. If you're out there paying those fees with just a couple properties, it's cutting deeply into your bottom line. And if you're just trying to get started, a lot of times that's a time where your funds are short. So I think it's completely fair to handle things on your own at the start, if that's the type of personality you have and you have the bandwidth in your life to do that. But what I usually see is a couple of things. Number one, some people just do not have that kind of personality, and it's just going to drive them crazy, and they need someone to handle it. And number two is, once you get to that volume where you've got enough properties, it's taking up too much of your time, you need someone to help you step in. And that's a lot of times that's also the way that you can turn your attention to buying more properties. Because now you can stop managing the property and you can keep shopping for more. That's a couple thoughts about that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one too, because I know I'm not the personality to do property management.
Mm-hmm.
And like we were talking about before, it's like I rent to the wrong people. So
you got too big of a heart.
Yeah, I'm like a helper by nature. And I mean, in business, I'm not like a pushover or anything, but I'm talking to people when I feel bad. I'm like, yeah, I'll hook you up. Don't screw me over. And then they don't pay rent for 6 months and turn you into the borough or trash your house.
You got to remember that the tenants that are going to take advantage of you, they are masters at convincing you that they're not. I mean, I remember the first property that I had before I was ever a property manager, when I had my one rental property, my first house that I bought, and it had become a rental for me. I remember I had my tenant move out unexpectedly, and now I was going to place a new tenant, and I was looking at that mortgage I had to keep covering, and I was scared. And I remember I brought this guy in who definitely turned out later to be a horrible tenant, but he showed up and I said, how's your credit score looking? He was like, it's not good. I'll be honest with you. It's not good. But he goes, I have 3 months rent on me right now, and I will pay it. It's my first month's rent. It's my deposit. It's my last month's rent. I'll hand it to you right now. He was ready, and he had a big smile on his face. He looked like a real sweet guy, and the fear took over for me. And I went, yeah, this is great. I'm sure the screenings will be fine, whatever. Let's just get this cash in my hand. And it took the fear away. So once he was in there, 6 months later, he stopped paying his rent, turned into an utter nightmare. And I remember thinking back and like, he knew what he was doing. He knew that if I screened him and I was careful and objective, I wasn't going to place him. But he knew I was scared, and he knew that if he handed me that cash, he'd get in the door. And so I always remember that. It's literally my own first rental property and probably my second tenant this happened.
Yeah, and that's a good point there too. What are some flags? Because I've had the same people. They're like, anyone who wants to pay you multiple months or cash is like one flag normally.
That's right.
What are some other flags you see that it's like, this is it's a red flag?
Yeah, I mean, you gotta look for just like very rude people when it comes to like scheduling the tours, people that don't show up. If people schedule a tour and they just don't show up, I always confirm those tours because you got to have people confirm within an hour before the tour that they're coming, because you just waste too many trips. But if they don't confirm and then they message you the next day and they want to talk about scheduling, this is a bad way to start a relationship with just complete lack of trust. So things like that. You touched on it a little bit. You really do not want to get into a habit of renting to people that are ready to move in the next day. There are exceptions to that, right? Especially in the modern world. I remember one time I rented to a guy. He had just moved here to Pittsburgh from Washington State. He was a young guy just out of college, and he had just gotten a tech job in Pittsburgh. And he was moving here on his own to live here alone and have a tech job. And he was staying in an Airbnb and he needed a place, and that was his plan. And he showed up in the morning and he goes, I want to rent this place. I would move in today. And screened him. He was perfectly good and it turned out great. So it's not always bad when someone wants to move in right away. But on the other hand, it's like some people, that's just not a good sign. People are in trouble because they're being evicted and they're ready to move in tomorrow. So you got to make sure you're calling those landlords in those kind of circumstances. Give it a little extra due diligence, I guess, is the tip.
And calling landlords is something that, like, I never did that.
Yep.
That's something you don't even think about. You're like, hey, they gave us their landlords. I'm not really going to call him because I don't think he's going to tell me the truth.
If you just ask a couple questions, it's amazing how much you learn. One other thing that I got in the habit of doing was if somebody had something on their criminal record that looked a little bit bad, right? Something that like anybody could have had, like a public intoxication when they were in college or something like that. A lot of very upstanding people have something like that on their record because they were just partying in college or something. But if you just ask somebody, can you tell me what this is about? You might get a couple things. You might get somebody that comes back very defensive, blame shifting, acting like they did nothing wrong and everybody else, they were the victim of something. God, that's kind of a bad sign. But if somebody comes in and just goes, yeah, I was in college, it was really stupid. That was years ago. I'm a different person now. Okay. You accepted the blame. That's the person you do want to rent to. So it's a lot about understanding humanity and understanding like what you look for in anybody that you have a relationship with, let alone, a trust relationship, which is a tenant landlord relationship.
One thing that I learned too is you have to do the background and credit every single time. Like I've had some really, really nice looking people, like people that looked like they're upstanding. They had like porn issues, like they were dealing in like trafficking and stuff. It's like really dirty stuff. It's like you would never know.
If you do credit, if you do look for income, if you do look for, clean criminal, clean eviction records, that gets you pretty far through it right there. Statistically speaking, that alone gets you pretty far. I mean, you do want to go statistics. I mean, this is a game of probability. You can sometimes place a tenant that meets every single requirement who still turns out to be bad. But if you do hold to those requirements, you're gonna avoid a lot percentage-wise. And as you do property management for a lot of years and a lot of volume, the percentages matter, the statistics matter.
Yeah. Do you still rent to people with dogs?
Yeah. I'll always say that in the modern society we live in, pets are just so common. Dogs and cats are so common. It's hard to completely go against them. You absolutely can. But I always say that a good tenant who's responsible, has a good job and a good credit score and no criminal record, their pets generally don't cause damage. But a tenant who is not a responsible person, who doesn't have a job, who doesn't have a credit score, that's the pet who actually does cause damage. So if you're screening the person, you're kind of screening the pet.
Yeah, I remember when you told me that years ago too, because I never rented it. Remember, I didn't accept pets at all. And you're like, hey, the people that own pets, dogs in particular, seem to be pretty responsible. Number one, they don't have as many places to move to also after the fact. So your retention might be there.
Yep.
But if they're good people, they're fairly responsible. For that kind of stuff.
We've all been in a rental property where there's some dog that's being abused. There's a dog that's just in like a cage and it shouldn't be there. It's malnourished. There's literal animal abuse happening. That's a tenant that wouldn't pass the screening. And so that animal is not going to be in a place that's where you're screening the tenants properly. Okay.
So we got the new guy. He's got a couple properties. You got a decision to make. Do you want to handle the call at 3:00 on Saturday with a sewer backup or not? Depends what you're built for. You can save the money Do it yourself. You're paying with sweat, or you can pay a property manager and pay with money. Early in the career, you may have to suck it up and learn the ropes. You kind of have to do it yourself at least once or twice, though, to even know the process. Like, in my opinion, to know even how to manage a property, because when you're looking at property managers, how do you know who to hire?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's going to be much easier for you to select a property manager that you like if you've done it for a while and you know a little bit about what you're doing before you hire your property manager, because you're going to want to have that conversation with the property manager you're going to hire. And you know, if you've been doing it for a while yourself, you speak the lingo, you understand what you're looking for, and you're going to be able to speak to them and get an idea if it's somebody that you can relate to or not. Definitely a personal connection, you know, to your property manager. So I do think that that's true. Through the years that I was managing property, when I had a client that I was trying to get their business, they were on the fence about whether or not they could hire a property manager or not. You know, this is usually what I'm talking to, somebody who's not sure they even want to hire a management company, and they're just asking about how it works. I always wanted them to feel like, hey, you know, take your time. Can I help you with anything? Can I show you how to do something? Can I share a lease, you know, draft with you that you could reuse? I don't care. You know, to me, it was always an opportunity to build a little bit of rapport and show trust. So if I could do a little bit of work for them, help them. Sometimes I would go out and I would do an analysis on their property for them. You know, here's what I think you should do to get it up to snuff, do some flooring, do some paint, this and that. And I think you're going to get your rent up to this, et cetera, offer them some tips, but then let them go do it themselves. Every property owner who is doing investment is always moving closer to needing a property manager at some point. So it always paid off to keep those relationships warm and fuzzy in those early stages of discussion.
You always want to it's help each other out.
It's a help. Yeah,
this is the small industry.
This is what you're always talking about, man. Like being a giver, being a helper, and I think that's always been a big thing for me too. So yeah, just offer a little bit of help. You know, some people might say you're getting taken advantage of, but you know, that's okay. You're helping people a little bit, and if they take advantage, they take a little bit of advantage. That's okay.
Yeah, a lot of people will take advantage, but that other person, you really help them out and like could change the trajectory of their investment portfolio. You know what I mean? It could have been that tip. It's like, you know what, this one actually made a difference of me like deciding I don't want to invest anymore or investing.
And that's the thing. I think there have been times where I've probably talked people out of getting into investment property more. You know, because there's realities of it. You know, sometimes people get into investment property because it feels, in a way, like it's a little bit glamorous or it's a little bit fun, and it's, you know, a thing they want to do. But when they really learn some of the more difficult aspects of it, some of the risks involved, some people can say, you know what, I just don't think I want to do this anymore. I think I actually want to get out of it. And that's okay. You know, it's not for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's interesting. Yeah. Because everyone portrays real estate to be the sexy get rich thing. It's like
passive income, right?
Yeah. Passive income. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Maybe in 40 years, you know, got to do the work now. It's
one of the least passive things I've ever seen.
Yeah.
The wrong word.
So we got the new guys then. Mm-hmm. Now, because you guys grew, how fast? Because you were over 200 doors in no time.
We started at
2,000 doors.
We started in 2015 with about 40 doors, and we went up to about 2,200 by the time COVID hit. I think like in the middle of COVID, I think that's where we were, in about 2,200. So we were growing fast, and we did very little marketing, very little to try to build our business. It was really just word of mouth. I think a couple people that we knew started to share our information and my contact info out on some Reddits and things like that. And so that was a great way to do it. And I always loved that part of the job. I loved meeting new people and getting to see what people are doing. And it was always very flattering. So, but the business grew fast. And as a property management company, that's hard. That's very hard because we were building systems from scratch, and I had never run a property management company before. So I knew how to manage property, but managing people was harder than managing property. So it's a part of the system of anytime you're running a little business. You gotta hire people properly. You have to give them their job descriptions and make sure they're doing it right.
So what are some of the top processes that you learned? I'm sure there were different breaking points also. It's like you probably got the 250 and then 500, and then everything kept breaking once you got to the part. But when you got to the over 2,000, what was like one or two of the core processes you're like, we had to completely rebuild this, but it was a game changer?
Yeah, that's a good question. Really what we had to do, we had to set very clear expectations of what the property manager was required to do as part of their job. So you need to be able to share that with the property manager, because the property manager needs to know when they're doing their job right or when they're not. That has to be something for any employee. And likewise, you need to be able to share that same thing with a property owner. So this is your client. And on day one, you have to say, the person that I'm going to assign to manage property for you under my company, this is the list of the things they have to do. And this is the list of things that if you ask them to do this, it's over the line. It's too much. Because there's a lot of ambiguity in exactly what is a property manager's job and what is not. Is it the property manager's job to make sure that your real estate taxes are paid for you? A lot of people would say, no, I'm going to, I'm managing my own real estate taxes. That's on me. But some owners are buying property from another country and they just assume they got a property manager. They're handling my property for me. I've never even seen it. So how do they know where the taxes are going or when they're due? So defining the job for the manager and for the client was huge. And that was probably the biggest thing we had to work through. And it's hard to do it retroactively. When you already have clients, you already have people working and you're trying to go back and lay out those guidelines. People are already used to their job and they already have an idea what it is and you're almost redefining it for them. That's not easy for people. Yeah,
that's a good tip too, because you're right. Going back to someone and trying to explain how things are going to be different. People don't like change. So if you think about it ahead of time, it's like, okay, let's define what it is.
That's what it is to be experienced in anything really, but especially in property management. The more you're experienced with it, the more you can get ahead of problems. And that's something that's a service you're providing. Because if you're a new investor, you don't even know some of the bad things that can happen. And if you have a property manager there that's saying, hey, just a warning, if you don't do this and this, there's going to be a chance that something bad could happen over here. Use that advice how you want. Maybe you can ignore it if you want to, but at least you have somebody there warning you these things. Yeah, and I think that's the idea here is getting ahead of warning somebody that problems are happening. I would have a property owner that had a property with like some really bad siding, right? Some old Insul brick siding that really should be replaced or covered over. And you got to warn them that if it's not dealt with, you're going to have animals crawling in there. Next thing you're going to have tenants and you're going to get into all these expenses. You don't have to replace the siding if you don't want to, but just so you know, if you don't, this is going to happen. And it's not our fault, right? It's just the nature of property.
I guess in everything too, communication. Okay. My next question here: for somebody when you're shopping property management companies, do you have some questions or what should they ask to determine? Because some property managers are really good and some are not. Yeah. Like how do you determine which ones you don't get bamboozled?
It's almost like interviewing anybody. You've got to ask 1,000 questions. You got to be prepared to ask every scenario you could envision. You want your property manager that you're interviewing to walk through an entire scenario. Hey, I want you to tell me what happens if my tenant calls you and says that the roof is just caved in. What's your procedure? What do you guys do when you hear that from the tenant? And you need your property manager to walk that through and say, easy, this is what we do. Here's our procedure. And it's not only what the property manager is saying to you on the phone that day, but what would the actual property manager who's handling it when it happens? Does that person agree? Do they know that? I think that those are the biggest questions. You just basically want to run through all the procedures. How is this handled? What happens when you screen the tenant? What are the screening requirements you guys are using? What does the lease look like? Can I look at the draft of the lease? Does the lease protect me in these certain ways? There are resources out there. I know there were some people that would call me over the years who they were part of groups where there was almost like a script with questions written. And I remember sometimes seeing the same questions from different people that were reading from the same script. And I liked that because that was always, that showed it was going to be predictable, good questions. But you just have to want to run through scenarios. You want to run through hypotheticals.
I guess from a property manager, I would always feel like I'm being a pain if I came with a bunch of questions, but I guess from the property manager side too, it's like, this is a responsible person.
That's right. You want someone that actually cares. It's actually harder to handle an owner if you sign them up and they just want you to handle everything and they don't care. That can actually be harder because you don't know what their goals are. One of the important questions that I always asked as a property manager that was being called on in these circumstances is, what is your goal? I think a lot of people that own property take for granted that their specific goal is like the goal. You want to make money, but in what way? Do you want to make cash flow today? Or do you want this to be good for you in 10 years? Or do you want this to be a good thing for you in 30 years? Or do you want to pass this property to your children and just keep it in the family forever? And those depending on what those answers are, you have to think about property management in a much different way. Different goals require different types of property management.
That's true. And one thing I'll plug in here too, make sure your property is getting seen every once in a while.
Yeah.
Walk through or something.
one of the hardest parts, for a high volume property management company is how do you actually get eyes on those properties? And I'm just going to say right here on the podcast that it's hard. It's very hard. That's a lot of visits to properties to try to make happen. And I think most property management companies struggle to do that. But if you're a property owner and you're going to hire a property management company, you want to ask that upfront. How often are my properties being seen? And you want to harp on that during the entire relationship. As years pass and as months pass, hey, can I get somebody out to see my place? Even if it costs a couple bucks, for most people, it's well worth it. Because if the property is just being seen by the tenants and that's it, you don't know what's going on. And that's bad. That's your investment. So
100%.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Don't be a cheap ass.
Nope.
Like if the property manager says they'll do it and it costs $250 to walk it, pay it. Like I just had a property. I got it was rented to someone for 4 years, never walked. Cost me like $14,000 to fix it now because we're cats and they trashed the place. It's like, don't be cheap to the property manager. No, I need you to just include it.
What does that do to your investment when that happens? Just wipes it out.
Takes your profit for like 10 years.
Yep. And if you're new to property management, if you're new to investment property, you got to think about that. If you're new and you just have a couple properties, of course they're on your mind. But as you grow and as you get more properties, make sure you have a system in place so that there's eyes on those properties, because it's easy to keep, when you have one or two, they're on the top of your mind. They're very important to you. It's a big part of your life. But once you get to the point where you got 10, 15, 20, it's easy for one of those properties to slip through the cracks and you're not thinking about it. So like you said, don't cheap out. Find, a way to spend a couple bucks to get someone with some smarts out there looking at the place and giving you feedback. I had some owners through the years that used to do something I actually kind of liked, which is they would just sort of pose as like a handyman for like a maintenance walkthrough. Hey, we got a maintenance man who's going to stop out. It was the owner, but he would just wear a little vest or something to make him look like he's official. And he would, look for smoke detectors and look for things, which is kind of the way we would pose it. But that was smart. Now the owner gets to actually see the place. And some property managers are probably scared to have that happen, but shouldn't be. I mean, you just want to work together. If it's an owner that you're working together with for mutual benefit, those eyes on the property are going to do nothing but help the relationship.
Right. And it's in the property manager's interest too, because if it's an owner who cares, they're going to fix it.
That's right.
They just need to know the issues there and then it'll get addressed.
That's right.
It solves problems in the future because then the tenant doesn't call.
Yeah. Maybe that's another tip for a new owner who's going to work with a property management company is make sure that you're trying to work towards mutual benefit with the property management company. I would work with some owners sometimes where, let's say I would call a roofer to get a quote for their house and it would be, certain number. And then the owner would call some other roofer and they got a lower number and they felt like they got a better deal. And they would almost rub it in our face. Like, you guys are idiots or jerks because you tried to give me this bad price. Well, if I'm a property manager and that happens, I go, cool, let's use your guy. And also, can I have his number? Because I'm going to start using him all the time. We're working together here. So you don't have to prove that you're the best getter of good prices out there. We're all working together. Different people's prices go up and down. So it's a mutually beneficial thing to come to the best price and the best quality workmanship. And we all want to work with that same person. Yep. I'm with you. What's the difference between a real estate brokerage and a property management brokerage? So they are the same licensure. If you're going to, do a brokerage and you want to do purchasing and sales of homes, you get a certain license for that. You get your brokerage license for that. If you want to do property management in Pennsylvania, you have to have the same exact license. It's more like once you have that brokerage in place, some folks will want to focus more on sales or focus more on management. It's kind of up to the owners of the company which way they want to go with it. There's an argument to say you should do both because they are sort of related in a lot of ways. There's also an argument that I think a lot of people follow, which is we're just going to focus on sales. And if we get a management opportunity, we'll push that over to the management company we know and vice versa. So I think you can go either way, depending on how people want to run their business. Is there anything we missed that we wanted to make sure to cover? No, I think that's it, man. I think we said we wanted to just see if there's any experience I went through that can benefit people. I think what we talked about screening tenants is huge. End of the day, you want to just slow everything down. I think you just want to make sure you're not going too fast. If you're trying to rush in and buy property and rush in and get a tenant and rush on to the next one, don't make that mistake. Take your time, make sure you're doing stuff right because it pays off in the long run. You know what? That just made me think of another question. Yeah.
What are your thoughts? There's two different investment strategies. Some people invest in the ghetto. They get really high cash flow. Some people invest in nice neighborhoods and there's low cash flow. With the guys that are investing in the really cheap houses, what are the issues and what are the benefits in those neighborhoods?
Number one, a question you didn't ask me specifically, but I think it's good to do a little bit of both. I think it's good to diversify if you can do some of both. I think, let me put it this way. If you're going to go into those ghettos, those areas where you can buy houses much cheaper and you can get that cash flow, it's the opposite of what you'd think. Spend more money on renovating those units than you do the houses in the nice areas. I would say to people, you show me a house in a beautiful neighborhood in Pittsburgh, it's like Shady Side or East Liberty or something like that. You show me a place that's not updated, I can still get you a good tenant. You can still screen somebody that wants to live there and it's going to be fine. They're going to be screened. But if you go into one of these rougher areas and you want to leave the place outdated and ugly, it's going to be impossible to find a good tenant there and it just won't work. So, if you look at a place in those bad areas, you want to do the opposite of common knowledge. You actually want to make it a little nicer. Make sure you do new flooring. Make sure you do new paint. Get some fresh pictures of it. And now you're going to find somebody that's going to say, I don't love this neighborhood, but since I'm living here at this cheap, relatively cheap price, it's a good deal. I'm going to live here and I'm going to save my money, because that's the tenant you want in those bad neighborhoods. Someone that tolerates the neighborhood because they're getting a better deal on the place to live. So
that's a good point.
I think you just need to make sure, since it all goes back to that screening, you need to be able to put somebody into the rough area who can be screened. Don't make the mistake to buy a beat up place in a bad neighborhood and just put anybody with a pulse in there. That, as far as I'm concerned, that will never work. There are people that do that and they succeed at it, but I think if you don't have a little bit of pride in what you're doing, that's the only way you can get by. If you have any pride in what you're doing, you got to clean it up. You got to make it look nice and you got to screen thoroughly.
Yeah, I like it. That's good.
Yeah.
All right,
stuff,
cool.
Man.
What's your favorite book you'd recommend to someone?
I'm actually a huge G.K. Chesterton fan. I love The Everlasting Man. Is like my favorite book of all time by G.K. Chesterton. I think it's an absolute masterpiece.
The Everlasting Man?
The Everlasting Man by G.K. Chesterton. I think it's from like 1910 or 1915 or something like that.
Nice.
Read that one. I've read that book about 15 times.
I like it. Cool. Hey, well, thanks for coming on, man. We appreciate you.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Good stuff. Hey, everyone, thanks for listening. Until next time, get out there, crush it, close some deals. We'll see you guys.